good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for this panel discussion centered around the idea of giving. My name is Alessandra Moctezuma, and I'm the gallery director and museum studies professor here at Mesa College. And I was very excited to do this exhibition as part of Mesa College's Women's History Month celebrations. There's many other things that are happening on campus. And when I was approached by the Feminist Image Group about doing an exhibition during the month of March, I thought it would be ideal. But I especially like the part of it which involved a performative aspect that would involve the audience. And as you saw, in the packed gallery, people seem to be having a really good time. And the artists came up with fantastic little mementos that related to their artwork and their project. So I think overall it was very successful. Some of the artists in the show are actually instructors here, and it was also nice to host them and to get to meet some new artists also. Before I introduce Susan Merland, I would like to thank my staff at the gallery, because they worked really, really hard to put the show together. And we have 25 artists with 25 wonderful projects, but a lot of details, so it all came together very nicely. And my students worked really hard. They help us in the gallery, and a couple of them are interning with us, so they made sure that everything was done. Today we finished at 4 o'clock, so we had an hour to take a break and have a sandwich. So that was nice. And I also want to thank, Pat Vine is never here. She never makes it out here because she's always trying to get people to come over, but she's a wonderful gallery coordinator, has been here for 25 years, and she's just fantastic, and I couldn't do what I do without her, and many of my students that have become our helpers. So first I'll just introduce Susan, who's the moderator, and then she will introduce the rest of the panel. The most important and exciting thing about Susan Merland is that she graduated from our museum studies program. She was, I think, one of the most amazing students. Because I think she was actually, the students were required to do 3 hours, well, she did like 6 hours every week, and she was here helping us with everything. And I think coming from her background in PR, she taught us, I think, as much as we tried to teach her. So it was fantastic to have her here, and she helped improve what we do, and so I'm very thankful for that. The participation in our program launched her a new career path for her, and she's now been working as an independent curator and art project manager. A couple of years ago, she organized a series of projects and performances surrounding the San Diego Art Fair, the Art Labs. And she just recently finished working on the Palm Springs Fine Art Fair, which brought 57 galleries and over 10,000 visitors to the desert. She's also been a freelance writer for the Union Tribune in San Diego, and beginning next month, she'll be freelancing for the San Diego City Beat. So we'll have another great person writing about what's going on in the arts here in San Diego. So let's welcome Susan Merland.
So much, Alessandra. So welcome to Women's History Month, or as I like to think of it, 31 days when the media gets its period and rediscovers women's rights. So we're 2 weeks in, and what an amazing time. We have Stephanie Meyer, author of Twilight, who is clearing her Bella karma by taking a break, she says, taking a break from writing to become a full-time feminist. Apparently you can't do both at the same time. I don't understand. Marissa Meyer, CEO of Yahoo. She blazed trails by getting her job when she was 6 months pregnant, setting up a nursery in her office, and then she told everyone she's not a feminist. And Sheryl Sandberg, COO of Facebook. She created a storm of controversy when her book Lean In came out this week. Depending on which way you look at it, it's either a feminist manual on how to advance your career while supporting other women in the process, or an anti-feminist manual that ignores the barriers that still exist out there. All of this is coming at a time when, according to one study, 71% of American women do not identify themselves as feminist. So we have a lot to talk about tonight. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about FIG, Feminist Image Group, and how GIFT came about. So FIG is an informal support group of professional women artists who get together to meet and support each other. I'm a member. It originally was called the Figurative Image Group because that was the type of work that the women were working on, but the interest expanded beyond that. We get together to stage group shows like this one, be a sounding board for each other, and provide encouragement. It fills that void that often happens when you leave art school and you need that critical eye. You need someone to look at your work and say, it needs this or it needs that. You need encouragement. So first I want to recognize the FIG members. You're all going to stand up. Almost all of our members participated in this show. We have about 30 people. Again, as I say, it's informal. And I think about 26 participated in this. So this specific show originated when our unofficial but much appreciated group leader, Anna Stump, she attended the Documenta art exhibition in Germany, and she came upon the artist Ida Appelbrug, am I saying that correctly? Appelbrug, giving away posters of her work, boxes of posters of her work, and people were going through them and finding pieces that they loved. And Anna noticed how engaged the audience was and what a gift it was that Ida was giving to the community. So she came back with this concept, and the group got together and discussed it and mulled it over, and there were women in the group who had given years of their lives to raising a family. And they had that question in their mind, did I give that time away? And it was both rewarding and a sense of sacrifice. That time might have gone towards furthering an artistic career. Other members took a global perspective, like you saw the pieces from Lisa Hutton and Lauren Carrera talking about global warming and reforestation, or Terry Hughes Ulrich talking about giving knowledge out to the community. So, of course, as you would expect, with 30-some women, you're going to have different approaches, and that's what makes FIG work and what's made this show very cool. So that's the brief history. Tonight, our panel will take these concepts of giving women art and feminism, and they will run with them. We'll take some questions from you, and then at the end we'll conclude with a freestyling period where each panelist gets to expand on anything we've discussed or bring up anything new or anything that's on their minds, and then at that point we will all adjourn to a bar. So, before we start, a little note about language. We will be talking about men and women as shorthand for ease of discussion. Of course, men and women are not monolithic. And there are always exceptions. Every experience is different. Your mileage may vary, blah, blah, blah. This is the disclaimer part of the evening. Because if we mention that disclaimer every single time, we will be here all night. So I just want to say that I want to beg your indulgence and say we are not talking about all men, all women, all galleries, all museums, or the entire art world. Right? Clear on that? Okay. I can meet our panel. I'm going to start with Allison Wiese. She is Assistant Professor of Sculpture in the Department of Art, Architecture, and Art History at USD. She earned her BA with honors in visual arts at Brown, attended Skowhegan, that's how you say it, right? Skowhegan? I'm off to a good start. School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine. She has an MFA from the Viz Arts Department at UCSD. One of my favorite pieces of Allison's is called Untitled. It's a trophy pile of wooden doorstops that she stole from...
Oh my God, I ungifted.
She did. She stole it from fellow artists and institutions. She went around and stole the doorstops out of their doors so their doors wouldn't close. She described it as both a benevolent and mischievous act, the cranky behavior of an artist wrestling with the limits of art's actual power, influence, and place in the world. I love that piece. Okay, Amy Galpin is Associate Curator, Art of the Americas at the San Diego Museum of Art. She curated Ruben Ortiz Torres' Portrait of the Artist as Young Man, and Behold, America, which has the exclamation point, which is Art of the United States, the first time that SDMA, MCASD, and the Timken ever collaborated on anything. And if you know what a big deal that is to get 3 institutions to collaborate. She received her doctorate from the University of Illinois Chicago before joining SDMA. Amy worked at Woman Made Gallery in Chicago and curated for the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago. Next to her is Allison Burgess-Williams. She's an adjunct professor of art history at SDSU, where she teaches courses in Renaissance and Baroque art history, as well as non-Western art. She's also a research associate at SDMA. She earned her doctorate from UCLA. Her current research interests include gender issues, concepts of the self in the early modern era, the ideology of courtly patronage of the visual arts, the history of collecting, and the early modern interior. There's no way I was going to be able to memorize that, so thank you for writing it down for me. And then Doris Bittar, at the end, is a multidisciplinary artist, writer, activist, educator, and gallery owner. She was born in Baghdad of Lebanese parents, later immigrated to New York, where she gained a curiosity to bridge differences between people. She has a BFA from SUNY, MFA from UCSD. She teaches in the Visual Arts Department of CSU San Marcos, works with civil rights organizations, and runs Protea Gallery, which just opened last December in North Park, and you're all supposed to go see it. Protea shows international and regional artists with the intent of expanding diversity and cultural dialogue in the San Diego scene. So we're going to start with Allison Williams. I'm going to give you the first question. From the curatorial statement, gifts are complex instruments and convey promises, bribes, manipulations, peace offerings, hidden motivations, and the hope of reciprocation. So, you specialize in the Renaissance and Baroque periods. What was gift giving like at that time?
It was very much, as this statement says, apart from the part where, yes, complex instruments conveying promises, bribes, and manipulations and peace offerings, and the hope of reciprocation, but really not so much hidden motivations, because I think that this was the way the world worked in European societies, and I know it worked in non-Western societies too, but I've only got 5 or so minutes, so yes, it really was a gift economy, because we're not in an industrial era, so gift economy was very much part of the sort of distinctions between commodities and gifts were very, very blurred in this period. And I just thought I would run down a few of the main gift-giving occasions and how those gifts sort of fit into the grand scheme of society. And of course, at the very top levels of society, in courtly societies, diplomatic gifts were very important. For example, there's a very famous case of a Medici family member giving a courtier, not the king of Naples, but giving a courtier a gift of an antique horse, a Greco-Roman horse. And of course that was not just a gift because he liked it. It was a gift exactly because he needed an in at the court of Naples, our Medici family members. So, that, and that was understood on both sides, that there was a quid pro quo. Now, to get to more regular society, a big gift-giving occasion was when women gave birth. And it's very hard to sort of distinguish between what women gave and what men gave in this period, because women did not, for the most part, have a lot of income of their own. Their income was their husbands. Their dowries went from their father's houses to their husbands' houses, and they rarely ever saw it. I mean, there are some cases, but really not many. And in giving birth, I think that both men and women understood that women were doing a great thing and were giving a great gift because it was so very risky. And so there were many gifts, and they would be purchased by men usually, but the women gave them. and women would crowd around women who'd given birth successfully, and they would give certain types of gifts, special birthing trays, extra fancy if they gave birth to a boy, less fancy, and these would be things that would be the stock items very often in artistic workshops. You know, we think of a patronage system, but those were stock items. They also used to receive special little nesting sets of bowls and myolica dishes, tin glazed ceramics, that had images of birthing scenes and mothers bathing babies and things like that. So there was a whole sort of mini economy around giving birth, and giving birth, you know, successfully was, people were very grateful. So that was kind of one aspect. And marriage, of course, another time when there was great amount of gift giving. And now, because dowries in my period from about 1400 to 1600 became ever increasingly large, that the families had to give in order to marry off their daughters, very often only one daughter could be married, the rest went into convents, and that was a smaller donation. Gift giving to convents and churches is a whole sort of different ballgame. So the gift giving was so big in terms of the dowry that there were counter gifts given by the husband's family of jewels, of clothing, of marriage chests, etc., and so on. But sometimes the wife didn't get to actually keep those. They just kind of went back into the husband's family. So gift giving is really, and these kinds of gifts, both birth gifts and wedding gifts that were given, were very much to cement societal relations. They, you know, people who worked together, worked in companies together in those kinds of situations, say in Florence, which is a mercantile community. Those people really, they cemented all their relations there, as well as familial relations. But so it wasn't just within families; it was to cement all kinds of stratification, people in all different strata together. Death, of course, was a huge gift situation, and very often people, even with giving bequests, after they died, they gave their goods away before they died because they knew they were dying. And a huge thing that women gave, they gave their clothes away. And clothes were hugely expensive in this period. And so giving your clothes away, knowing that they would be remade and reused, was a way of passing yourself on to future generations. And you know, we think in our society where we wear something for a while very often and then just discard it, this was not the way. So clothes as gifts were very, very important. Courtly women gave their ladies-in-waiting gifts of clothes, collars, small jewels. Those kinds of gifts were what were given among women and women friends. So it was mainly the big life cycle events where gifts were given. A few saints' days, but there was no, you know, Christmas gifts, very rare. Birthdays, really not celebrated in that way with gifts. But hospitality on all levels was a huge gift in early modern society as well. So food and things like you were all giving to all the big people giving us food and little presents. That's very much part of early modern society.
Fascinating, thank you. Next. Our next question is to Allison, Wiese, and Amy Galpin. Most of us can name examples of artists being asked to give inappropriately. Can this dynamic be changed? And also, what happens when artists say no? So Allison, I'll let you tackle that one first.
I suppose I've been on both ends of this, so I think like a lot of artists, I've done dual duty. So I began after undergrad working as an arts administrator, so I've been on both sides, right, of being an artist and also working with artists. I also did a stint during grad school working for the much missed Sushi Performance and Visual Arts. So I curated their stairwell for 2 years, and the first thing that I did, now I'm remembering this is a very interesting recollection, that the very first tour I was given was to solicit donations for their auction, but I was also being tasked with revivifying their visual arts component. They had not been especially supportive of visual arts over the years prior, though quite strong for dance and performance. So I felt justified, you know, in asking the visual arts community to support what I was about to do, right, which was to program 2 seasons worth of visual arts exhibitions, but as a younger artist and a totally, you know, new and really not a fake curator. In some ways, I guess it was an education to me as a young artist to get the responses I got, some of which were incredibly generous and supportive, or even people trying to give me their work because they perceived it to be an honor, or a way to sell work that they would gain 50% of the sale price from. And then I had some really interesting and challenging responses from artists I very much respect. One of whom said, tell me exactly why I should give you my work to sell in order to support dance. Though I love dance, I'm perpetually asked to support other disciplines. And I had to really think about that quite a bit. And I don't think that I lied in telling him I believe that this is a good cause. Here are the artists I've programmed for the next year. And he was good enough to then say, okay, I'm going to give you a couple drawings. And I sold them, and that helped us quite a bit. But it's interesting to sort of reflect back on that. I think that the most dramatic but kind of mundane incidences of things I've been asked to give are completely standard, which are to say that many of the very fine, laudable nonprofit spaces that I've exhibited with have never made any provision whatsoever for honorariums or exhibition support. I've been very, very happy to show with them. They've done an enormous service. I wish that San Diego had, like, for instance, a Lawndale Art Center, which Houston does, which provided a great home for my work after graduate school. But it was an interesting moment to be told by them, you're going to fill this space, and we have $200 to offer you. It didn't make me not want to do the show. I guess the second part of that question, and one that I became more and more sort of conscious of, some of the gifts I've been given as an artist have been tremendous in terms of actually support, sometimes more emotional than financial, but sometimes financial as well. One of the best gifts I was given was a grant from the Creative Capital Foundation, who are very conscious about not just giving money to support a project, but also giving tools that would help you build a sustainable career. And one of the things that I learned working with them was very much about talking about money openly. Things that I had not known to do before, I learned to do. I don't do them perfectly. I've certainly jumped at an opportunity to exhibit work somewhere where I probably, the next words out of my mouth should have been, will there be any support for this project? What will you offer? And then it became too late to ask.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't ask. And then I sort of begrudgingly asked a little bit, and then of course the money was spent, and I know what it's like to be on the other side. So, I mean, I think inappropriate, I don't like, having worked with many institutions, I don't like to blame the curators who are stretching budgets thin, but I do think that one thing I learned from the Creative Capital program was to ask. That the best thing I could do, so again, I think without there being, when you ask about consequences, what are the possible consequences, I think that I've been really careful to learn the terrain, find out as much as I can, ask questions, and then police my own boundaries, which are to say, to know what I would like to do and what I would not like to do, but that even when I've decided to show somewhere where I'm probably providing more in, I'm filling the space. I'm the programming at the nonprofit. I'm actually what's supporting them in a sense, right? Not the other way around. Artists are often way too supplicant in the way that we see our careers. That doesn't mean anything about money necessarily. It could be about who we work with or how we work, but we tend to be supplicant. And I think that my way of handling this, so I don't know if this answers the question, but I mean, the zero consequences way that I've found to deal with still, in some sense, kind of politicizing what I ask for is to always ask, to make sure I always ask. Because if you do not ask, and this would be completely relevant to all male artists as well, it will often never be brought up, never. So if you ask, you've at least raised somebody's consciousness about it. Perhaps they've had to then account in their head for how much you're spending, what the budget of the project will be, what the cost of framing might be, and what you're providing for them. I'm trying to think what I've been asked to do inappropriately. I suppose I've always been very happy to give work to support institutions that have shown my work. I feel like that's actually a nice way that I can, support places that have been good homes for dialogue for my work. I've been less happy to do so when it's just a persistent ask every year from a nonprofit that I don't see serving people that, I have dialogue with, but I'm usually it's quite easy to say no.
Have you ever been asked to donate stuff for an auction?
Oh, yes, constantly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, it kind of depends on
I have really mixed feelings about this. I mean, I think there might be better ways to earn money for nonprofits. I'd love to see other models explored. I don't think that always creates a great home for your work. I've had some work purchased at an auction and feel very, very pleased, both at the economic outcome, that I was paid more than I ever would have been paid through any of the outlets I have access to, that the work found a good home with somebody who wanted it and cared, and that's been a perfectly fine experience. I've also given work to auctions and probably felt like it was an act of, pure generosity on my part. I mean, and I guess I would love to see some of the rules about deductions change, tax deductions. If you have never filed your taxes as a Schedule C, right, a business tax as an artist, I don't know if you're aware that if I give you one of my pieces, and then just for free, because I like you, or you buy it, whichever, it passes into your hands. If she then donates it to a museum, she can write off the market value of the piece, whatever that is, and it could be very little or it could be a lot, but she can write off the entire market value. As an artist, were I to approach a museum and say, hey, do you want this thing? And they have good barriers. They wouldn't say yes if they didn't want it, I hope. But they could very much want to accession it just as badly out of my hands as out of yours. But if I give it, I will be able to deduct only the cost of the materials.
The taxes on the materials.
Yes. Yeah, it's even worse so. So there's an enormous, incentive for people who have the wherewithal to buy a small or a large piece of work to donate it. And there's no, but suddenly if it's coming from me, the thing has no market value. I mean, I understand that because I've also been an arts administrator and a curator, that there are swarms of artists who would love to donate their work that I don't want to all sorts of places that it probably shouldn't go. But I don't know that institutions need that kind of protection.
So Amy, how about you?
Too much airtime.
Well, in response to the question, of course, I mean, I immediately think about the issue of auctions. I think that's what artists often talk about, is feeling like they're asked too often, maybe they're asked repeatedly by the same organization, and because of the tax issues, donating to an auction cannot always be as fulfilling. But there are all sorts of reasons to do things, and if you like an organization or you want exposure for your work. But I think it is really hard, if you value your work at $10,000 and it sells at an auction for $600 and you only get to write off such a small part of that. That's not a great feeling, and I think that the auctions, it's complicated. But I always think artists have to, at some point you have to say, what are you comfortable with and what are you not comfortable with? And I think that you'll never, I used to work when I worked at Woman Made Gallery with a lot of artists who were first selling. This is the first opportunity to sell their work ever. And they would always feel really crestfallen. We used to not like to suggest a price. We wanted the artist to suggest the price. But if they really, really pushed me, I would offer a price, and they always felt very crestfallen because the amount of work you put into creating a piece will never come back to you monetarily, especially when you're starting out. But I just want to say, from an institution point of view, and giving, or the promises, bribes, hidden motivations, and all of that, absolutely. I mean, I have been a part of solo exhibitions that I have not been proud of the fact that there wasn't support for these exhibitions. And I've been at the San Diego Museum of Art for 3.5 years, and I think we are actually making tremendous strides in terms of writing into my budget when I work with contemporary artists to pay for framing. If the artist is making new work, to pay for some of the supplies. We do not, if you are ever asked to speak at the San Diego Museum of Art and you're not offered a stipend, you should say no, because we are really, trying to make that policy set not only at the museum, but we have support councils that raise money for the institution, and sometimes they ask an artist to speak, but they don't offer a stipend. And so we're really trying to establish those things, and I regret that some of the artists that I worked with early on in my time at the San Diego Museum of Art did not benefit from these changes, but change doesn't come easy, and I am really proud that we are working towards working with our artists to help framing, transportation, travel, stipend costs. Not to say that those fees are a lot, and I just think honesty is really important, and I always talk with any artist that I'm working with fairly honestly about, this is going to be easy, this is not going to be easy, these are the parameters financially, these are the parameters in terms of press coverage. I try to be honest as well about, what I can do within the scope of my position and my institution.
I want to see a show of hands of anybody who's ever been asked by a for-profit, maybe an advertising agency, to donate your work for their campaign, where everybody else on the campaign is getting paid, but they want the artist to work for free. Anybody? I'm actually surprised that it's not a larger number. It seems like I've gotten that request before. We want your photo for our advertising campaign, but we don't have any money to pay you. Artists continue to create, even if there isn't a recipient or market for the work. We all know that. By definition, there's no monetary value to what's been produced, so artists are, by their own choice, giving away their time and talent. When does that become unhealthy? I'm going to address that to anybody on the panel who wants to take it. Oh, come on, ladies.
Well, I think it becomes unhealthy, I think, when you set a precedent. And then, there's you give things, and then the expectation is you will do it again and again and again. And it's the part of not asking that, Allison, not asking for something, I got in trouble the first time in 2006 when I asked for help. There was a traveling show of women, and half of them were Middle Eastern descent. And I said, okay, you've covered, it's going to 6 venues or whatever it was, and you've covered the shipping costs between each venue, but not the initial shipping. In other words, it's going to cost me, these paintings you want, it's going to cost me $500 to send them to you if I pack it right and everything. And she said, you're too much trouble, and she kicked me out of the show. And what was odd about that is I talked to the other artists, and I said, this just happened to me. And I was, I come from, I have a union background. I was a labor organizer for almost 5 years, if you can imagine that. But so I tried to organize the other artists. Like, come on, guys, let's get the shipping. We should get the shipping. Why wasn't that considered in the budget? It was forgotten, And just like when I was a labor organizer, these other women fell into 25% supported me. This is just like what labor organizing. 25%, yeah, I'll sign a card. 25% just shirk away. They're interested, but they're not going to support you. Another 25% are like, we don't want to support you. This is too scary. And then, so 50% don't support you, period. And then another 25% attacked me. And other Arab artists, too. I was like, wow. I thought artists were more liberal, more pro-union and more pro-collective. And that was 2006, and at that time, for 2 more years, I wasn't in any shows at all. After that, things kind of opened up for me, and I was glad, that things moved along, and I've been in lots of other shows. But I remember thinking I was stigmatized for that. So it's like, that risk really, for a couple of years I said, God, I should have just paid for that shipping. I'd be in the show now, I'm on the show right now, and and that came on the heels of other rejections. So I was kind of feeling like I was just doing everything wrong, asking. But it was important to ask, and I talked to some curators in the Middle East who told me, no, you gotta ask. And actually the first place that funded everything for me was a show in Sharjah, near Dubai. They got money, I guess. I couldn't pocket any of it. That was their rules. You can't have any of this money. So no stipend, but everything was paid for. Like, a lot, everything I wanted.
Do you think it gets to the issue of control? If I choose to give it away, I'm comfortable with it. If somebody comes to me and wants me to give it away, yeah, not so good with that. Is that the difference? Is that the
I mean, giving can be really ogreish, right? I mean, you're getting or you don't want it and someone's shoving it at you and they want something in exchange. Yeah, it's pretty, I think a lot of us have that relationship, women and women. I mean,
I mean, I think to be, involved in the arts, again, when you're starting out, and this comes from the art history side or being an artist, like you have to be willing to give. And you have to, if I didn't do 10 internships and volunteer at 10 different places, I don't think I would have the job that I have now. I do think you have to give to be in the arts. But I think there always is a point where when you're uncomfortable with it, if you don't, want to ship your work and you can't, the shipping is an issue, the shipping price, and you have to kind of stand up and say, I just as sometimes people say, I don't want to be in this show, I don't want to be in this juried show, or I don't want to sell my work for $500, I want to sell my work for $15,000. Like, I think that it's up to everyone when they have that kind of limit, that point. And for me, and perhaps everyone will disagree, but I do think at some point, surely the giving was a part of the process of, finding ultimately stability. And I think that, there was of course a lot of luck involved as well, but I mean, I think at some point it's just whenever you sort of personally feel that you're giving too much. I mean, I don't know about if it's this control issue or not. I mean, I think a lot of people want to be in shows or want to have opportunities or have opportunities to have collectors come visit their studio or go to and meet collectors or what have you. And then, everyone reaches various stages in their career where they think, this is too much. I'm not going to do this anymore. And for me, I think, I guess we all sort of have to come to that point personally. For me, as opposed to this overarching idea of giving, I think it's a personal experience.
Haven't you ever seen that dynamic, though, when people turn on somebody else and say, you're giving away your work, therefore that devalues my work? We saw that a lot with photography when Flickr came out. Suddenly people were putting out photos for free. I've seen that. I've been on the receiving end of that. What are you doing giving away your stuff? What are you doing blogging for free? You're undermining, so
25, 50, 25% ratio.
that could well be.
I do think there's something funny, and I could be making a horrible generalization that I'll regret later, or an analogy that is totally false, because I'm thinking out loud, but that the story Doris told about sort of the solidarity or lack thereof amongst artists in this scenario has to do with some sort of a hierarchy, and that can be, and this is maybe to tie back into the issue of just feminism, is that there have been critiques too of the way that this could be true of any subaltern, right? Of like what do you do when there's that? How do people react to those hierarchies? And that, for some environments, for women, but again, not to speak monolithically, because this could be applied a lot of ways, that hierarchy that I think artists often are in economically, they're sort of in this funny relationship to institutions, that can actually cause that sort of behavior. It's sort of like there's a certain kind of a viewing device that Americans wear, blinders that Americans wear, that if you poll people about whether they are middle class, or everybody thinks we're middle class, even if we're not statistically. Everybody also thinks that they are soon going to be upper middle class.
Right.
And that will cleave us apart, right?
Exactly.
In terms of what we will ask for, because we're about to get that other thing. I'm about to get a show. I'm
Right,
not going to diss the
Don't
curator for not
destroy my
paying shipping.
fantasy, you know, and people hold on to fantasy more than reality.
I think that you see this as careers like progress through visual arts, but lives progress too, because careers are really funny things and they could look all sorts of different ways. But that one thing I remember being told really early on that was a great thing to be told. I mean, interestingly, I was in school in the late 80s, early 90s, somewhere where any interest expressed in any sort of commercial market for your work was completely forbidden. So you were not allowed to even mention or ask questions about the idea of a commercial career. And that's actually served me really well. You know, I mean, that protected me from a lot. I was a freshman the year that the stock market collapsed and the 80s art boom ended. So in a way, I didn't have, like, I always knew that I would be cobbling things together. So that was a kind of freedom. But I do think that, you know, one of the things you see amongst artists at different career states is that they're sure that when they get a show in a commercial gallery, that gallery will, like, I don't know, be their dad or something. You know, it's going to be like, again, not to make a joke, you know, but it's going to be the big bucks sort of solution, a parent figure. And then you have a show, and maybe it's very successful and you sell everything, or maybe it isn't, but you wake up 3 days later and you're sort of the same person. And your work is still your work. I mean, maybe you had a really good party and were treated well, or maybe you weren't, but you might owe framing. You know, you might actually owe money at the end of this experience, but that there's always somebody who is, artists are hungry for, I think, approval. We don't get a lot of societal approval, so I've noticed amongst my friends earlier in my career, less so now, that no matter what anybody got in the way of accolades or successes, that it sort of lasted for like 3 days. And then they were like, you know, they were like, I just got a Guggenheim, everything's perfect. And then like 3 days later, it would be like not good enough, not good enough, desperate for the next sort of source of approval, but that can be a really destructive cycle. But it also creates a hierarchy, right, where we're not going to necessarily all ask for exhibition fees the same year at the same time and get what Canadian artists have.
You know, the sad thing, just to, quickly, the ending of the story continued. The woman who brought me into this traveling show, very, very dear friend, and in fact, I was one of the stars in the show. So they kind of told me that, and they were, because most of the other artists were regional to Boulder, Colorado, and I was like in California, so I was like the outsider, you know. And the woman who brought me in, who was living in Boulder, was also kicked out of the show afterwards. In a very interesting, oh, well, you said you were going to do this, now you're doing that, Frances. Why did you say you're going to do this? Now you're doing that. Oh, well, I could go back to doing that. No, you know, it's just better if you're not in the show. And she's the one that brought me in, so we were both punished. It was just very strange. You know?
Not one of those good situations you want to
No,
remember.
it was really, really peculiar.
So Doris, while I've got you on the hot seat, some male artists seem to get a lot of gifts early in their career. They get mentoring, they get exhibitions, they get promotion, they get critical feedback. Does the art world, and again we're generalizing, do the same for women? If not, why not?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was an undergraduate, and maybe things have changed now, and I hope they have. I think women have changed a bit, you know, just from teaching the young women in my classes the last maybe 4 years or so. I mean, are not so, they're more out for themselves, they're bolder, they're not afraid to ask for things for themselves, they're not like in the shadow of some a boyfriend's career. And before that, it seemed that way, you know, that these talented women were putting a lot of energy into making sure the boyfriend was professionalized and at their expense, really. So I do see some changes, but when I was an undergraduate, I remember the girls were told, oh, this is lovely. Oh, it's a little small. Oh, small is wonderful. It's great. And then the guys were like, make it a little bigger, you know. Squeeze out some more paint in it, you know. Let me introduce you to so-and-so. And I went to SUNY Purchase, so some of my teachers were New York artists, and they helped the guys. They really did, you know. And But at my end now, as a teacher at a college level, I often see the guys have a kind of a little bit more confidence, or at least they're showing more confidence, so they're not as afraid to waste paint and squeeze out a little more and use a bigger brush. And so I go around to the, I teach painting and drawing, so I go around to the students and the girls especially, I'm just like, what's this on your palette? Why is your palette this big? The guys are like, I'm generalizing, it's not always true, and I tell them, stop being stingy with yourself. This is, I say to all my students, but especially I want the women to hear it, I don't want to see something the size of chicken poop on your palette. I just don't. Use that little brush later. Get your big gesso brush and start your painting with that. That kind of, and we're taught to be thrifty and careful and, all this stuff. And I am like that. I'm a mother of 2 boys. I have 4 younger brothers. I just like, it's a man's world out there, it seems, I was the oldest one, so I could always win in basketball. And then when I couldn't win anymore, they were taller, it didn't matter, I didn't care. I was too old. I was driving a car by then, So giving is just, it's complicated. It's very complicated. And I was very skeptical about the whole premise for this exhibit and this discussion. I was like, I'm not going to do this, And I joked around. I went to Jennifer Bennett. She was the first stage person I went to, and I was like, which one of these should I get so I could sell it in my gallery? I'm going to be a capitalist tonight, that kind of. And so I think of words like, rather than giving, because it is complicated, infiltrating, infiltration. As Arab Americans, and me and my Arab colleagues, men and women, Arab Americans tend to just be, there's Jennifer. I'm going to sell that piece. But, they tend to be...
Yeah, we switch the gallery artist relationship.
So I would, what was I going to say? Anyway, infiltrate. I met with a bunch of young Arab American UCSD students a few years ago. And they were talking about how our parents all want us to be doctors and lawyers and engineers. And the civil corps of engineers is mostly like Lebanese, Iranian, and Palestinian. Don't tell anybody. They're the ones making sure our bridges are safe. But they're like sick of it. So we have a lot of influence in terms of civil engineering, but not in political science, not in universities. And one of them said, we have to infiltrate. And all of them were majoring in subjects other than engineering, which was really kind of cool. So yeah, you wait and see. But I kind of feel like the giving means you're stepping out of the market. And it's like, let's stay in the capitalist market. Let's and not be so thrifty. Let's take our husband's money and go buy art for the top price and not some thing you haggled down, So now that I have a gallery, I've sold a lot of art to women, but half of the experience has been almost humiliating. Just like trying to bargain me down to nothing. And I was like, I need to survive. Oh, you'll survive, honey. No, I really need to survive. Okay, buy the flowers I'm selling flowers in this gallery. So, I'm just I am trying to survive. And if I don't, I will close. It's really simple. I'm not going to, it's just not going to happen. But definitely when I started to show internationally and everything's paid for, except I can't pocket it, which upset me a little bit. So I could spend $60,000, but I can't pocket it. But that's okay. So when I started showing there, though, I started establishing a relationship with the curator, well-known curators, that was just so wonderful. And, but I feel like I had to wait 20 or 30 years for that, when a lot of the male artists were getting it as undergraduates or even graduate school. That kind of, because the curator could tell you, they can understand your work, and they can tell you, use this material. Make it a little, think of it as an outdoor piece instead of an indoor. Just these little things, and they were kind of like a para-you, helping you and shepherding you, and you feel protected. And that relationship is very special. And why should women get it when they're in their 50s or 40s or never, you know? So, and men seem to get that shepherding a little sooner, you know? But I see it with my students, the guys they're confident, I'd rather hang out with them than the girls who are being very stingy.
We also discussed the transition that happens in that there are more women in art schools, but in art galleries, there are more men. So what's happening?
No, I disagree with that a little bit. There are more women artists, period, like 75–80% of artists, period. But it's just in certain stratified areas, we're just 10%. It used to be 0 and it went to 2%, and now it's like 10%, like the Museum of Contemporary Art. Not just here, but everywhere. They all kind of follow the same track. But I think at college and university galleries, the curators have more freedom. They have perimeters. They have to show, the faculty show, they got the student show, they got, you know, like Alessandra. But she has some freedom to have a show like this. And so in those spaces, you might be getting a picture of what the true contemporary art world is, you know. So, I mean, the museum, I was talking to Bob Pincus earlier, the Museum of Modern Art in New York was a contemporary museum. Museum of Contemporary Art, but then the modern period kind of froze and we moved on to postmodern or whatever, you know, and they became a museum. They try to do a lot of things, but they realize they're not the cutting edge museum anymore. Maybe sometimes, but usually not. They're the preservation of modernism. And the contemporary art museums, they're not really contemporary art museums. They're kind of the frozen period of the minimalist era, pop art, and it's still very, very male-oriented. So it's not, they should rename themselves. Or get real, like start looking at what's happening, you know, because we should be 40 to 90% of the shows, not 10%.
Well, that's an excellent segue to the last question before we take questions from the audience. Let's get down to brass tacks. How do we get more women shown? How do we get more women selling their work, making a career off their work? What do we need to do? You have the crystal ball, the magic wand.
Well, I mean, I think collaboratives like FIG are great. I think that, you know, I hope not misuse, but use the term solidarity that was used before. I mean, I think when artists can work together in collaborative forms and show their work together and support one another, I think that's always great. And I think San Diego is having a fairly nice moment right now with artist-run spaces. A lot of people are talking about them, but they seem to kind of be short-lived, and after a couple of years they close, which some could say that's fine. You know, does an artist space always have to exist? But I think I find the San Diego cultural scene to be pretty separate, you know, sort of in these compartments, and I think you know, working together more, having more dialogue and conversation can ultimately result in more shows. And I always encourage people when they tell me, you know, I really want to show my work and, you know, whatever, and then they say, but I don't want to be in that show. You know, I don't want to participate in that show. You know, well, if you want to show your work, you know, you need to get that resume going, because, you know, one show can lead to the next, you know, a curator might look at your work more if you had more exhibition opportunities. And I have to say, I feel really excited about the fact that in my life, you know, when I was in graduate school, everyone said, you know, most of the students were women, but all our professors were men. And actually my department that I received my PhD in is almost completely turned over, and it's almost all women now as opposed to men. And I think that they're seeing more of a trend in terms of art history professors. I'm seeing more of a trend in terms of curators being women. And I think that the missing piece is the artists. And I think, you know, we have to figure out in terms of, you know, value, in terms of economic value for work, in terms of exhibition of artists. You know, I mean, the facts still remain that, you know, 5 to 10% of permanent collection galleries at museums are worked by women, and so you know, there's a lot of space to go, and I'm curious to hear what my colleagues here have to say in response to that question?
I kind of wanted to bounce off that. When I went to, when I was an undergrad, which wasn't in the art field at all, most of my professors were men. And then I got into art history, and all my professors, except for one or two, just happened to be women. And that was so inspiring to me that it really kind of helped me through. And so I think kind of mentoring younger generation as one develops oneself, I think is really important in this whole enterprise.
Absolutely.
There's also, I was a public art administrator for 2 stints, once for the city of Austin and then for the city of San Diego, that it's a much laughed about and remarked about. It's just a phenomenon. I mean, like the vast majority of municipal public art administrators particularly, but private public art programs too, are administered by women. I mean, overwhelmingly so. If you go to the public art pre-conference for Americans for the Arts or any of those events, you are surrounded by women. I'd be very curious about museum directorships, because I think that at that very top layer, museums are still probably almost overwhelmingly run by men, though there are great exceptions I can think of. And so there was some debate, I remember when I first got into arts administration, reading in the Public Art Review a really interesting article that sort of, I can't remember how it panned out in terms of an opinion, but that conjectured about this kind of question of like, well, are women just really good at this sort of essentializing quality? Like, oh, well, women bring people together so they can be on the job site, like, and get the contractors and the architect and the artist to like cooperate because they're women and they have these special mystical, like, which I don't think is necessarily true. But on the other hand, it was also pointed out that these were new programs that were largely underpaid for the skill set that was required. So they did not necessarily, so that in a way there was a ghettoization happening too. And I think, I also see that as a great strength. I mean, I liked the 2 or 3 women I worked for in public art agencies were mentors and wonderful. I mean, just as someone who grew up, with parents who had very wonderful values, but traditional work labor division, it was incredibly important to me to work as an arts administrator and then have women that I worked for who had kind of very different lives. I think in terms of getting more women shown, I see at least, over the last 10 years, way less conversation about being conscious of including women in exhibitions. I don't follow this, because it went up at one point in major national shows. I think it went up to like 20-25% or something in some of the bigger exhibitions, but then it went down again rapidly. I think that some of the people like Jerry Saltz who have continued to prod at this, whatever, I don't always agree with his criticism, but I like that he frankly once a year pulls this out and says, oh, look what Chelsea looks like now. But I also think that being aware that there are different art worlds to operate in, which is I think what Doris was sort of alluding to, is like, well, it depends on what you look at as a career. I don't want to think that any of my students who are graduating now will be having a lesser career or life as an artist by having to make decisions to say not want to be in the Whitney Biennial. I would like them to choose that. I think that one of the things standing in the way of more women getting shown is frankly huge cultural and institutional sexist issues like universal childcare. Things that are not endemic to the art world. They have to do with, well, what was the best way for me to support myself as an artist? I discovered I loved teaching. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have done it, but it's also a really nice fit. Well, there was the maternity leave policies. I mean, frankly, so my husband teaches here. His paternity leave was 24 hours. One could go into labor and not be done by the time that's over. So he had wonderful support from his colleagues. It worked out, but it worked. And then my university, their maternity leave policy guarantees the very minimum that California allows. So I could have been put in a position to teach half a semester and then come back, which wouldn't be very fair to the students. And it would have left me with very poor teaching evaluations, I'm guessing, which would have affected my tenure. All this to say the rules about, my maternity leave, nothing was transparent. At my institution, if I had not had a chairperson who was supportive and wonderful and who said, I'm going to get you as much as I can get you, and if I hadn't had a dean who said, I'm going to move your course release till the semester, that was by chance. So I'm very grateful to those people, but I would like to, I made decisions in my life often out of fear until the last minute. Well, can I have a child and get tenure? I really wasn't sure, and in the end I just had to sort of make my best guess that it would be really, the best thing to do would be to try. And we don't know if I have tenure yet, but it would have been much easier for me to operate for the 10 years before I became a parent if I had known that if I applied for a teaching job I could keep it, that I could progress at a normal rate, that I wouldn't be handicapped, that I would have access to childcare, that I'd be able to pay for it. None of those things are available to us in this country, and that makes an enormous difference. I've been at a residency with a Belgian artist who had an 8-week-old child and was able to still come to a residency, and that was a personal decision that she, I wouldn't have had any option, right? Mm-hmm. Since this is no judgment about separating or not separating oneself from one's child, but there are currently only 2 or 3 residencies I can think of in this country that allow an artist, male or female, to bring their children in any way. And that's been an enormous thing that I've seen as adding value to my career, is being able to go somewhere and be supported and work in a community with other artists, make contacts outside of my region, learn from other people, and it's sort of foreclosed to a lot of the other art worlds that might in other ways be more female, but then they're also at a disadvantage.
Well, some places, they support the arts, and you can actually have a career in the arts without having to teach. So in Europe, a lot of people I showed with when I was in the Sharjah Biennial, and then in Alexandria in Egypt had its little biennale, and the Europeans were making careers out of it. They weren't wealthy. They just were, the governments, in Germany and Holland, and they were just supporting them. In France, they were just, in England even a little, not as much, but they were supporting the arts, in a complete way, so that they made a modest income without having to teach. And the projects were supported. Mm-hmm. Like making 40,000 a year, 40,000 euros.
It's a tough sell here in San Diego, unfortunately.
Yeah. But the other interesting thing, though, is I always look at the blue chip markets a little bit, mm-hmm. and women are not in that in this country. Not in Europe either, but oddly in the Middle East, I think of 5 major artists in the Middle East, and 4 of them are women, and they're blue chip artists. People are buying their work for investment purposes. I'm like, well, why can't, and you wouldn't think it in the Middle East, right? You'd think. And the ratio there, the majority of the artists are women in the Middle East, just like here. It's about the same ratio. But the men seem to be doing less of the avant-garde stuff, more of the modernist, well-crafted work, and the women are doing kind of out there work, and the market is blue chip for women
supporting
in the Arab world. I'm not kidding you.
Good to hear.
Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, they have a lot of other problems, but they seem to be. When I lived in Beirut for 6 months, it was the best of both worlds. If I was carrying too many groceries, some guy would come and take them in my flat for me, and then, and I'd try to pay him. No, that's an insult. Or a bunch of old guys that tell the youngest of them, if they're all 70 and there's a 60-year-old, the 60-year-old had to carry my groceries. I had no choice. Didn't have to tip him, and then on the way there, where, you're a professor, after that I'd walk by. I was teaching at the American University of Beirut, and she's a professor and she's doing great, so it was just kind of strange. But I was like, I love this. This is heaven,
Interesting.
And it was good to be married, because I could always say, oh, my husband, they just back off. Just use your husband excuse. It was just, that was the closest to heaven I ever got to. Except for the politics, Except for the bombs going off.
There's that. There is that, yes. Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. Who has a question? Anyone from FIG by any chance? Okay, how about you there?
I was just going to say, I'm an ex-firefighter, so I get the whole discrimination and being a very male oriented job. And my question is, in the art world, is it more discrimination, or is it more of, like what you were saying, lack of mentoring for the females, lack of resources, lack of them being confident in their work and risk takers? Or is it a combination of both, or is it something totally different? Why there's so less female artists showing, being successful? I mean, like the 10%, that's
It's shocking. Yeah,
And
it's
it just
shocking.
went up.
It may be
It's
worse than
2%.
firefighter percentages, right, at this point? No, what's?
No, there's about one, in my academy, there was 5 of us out of 50.
Okay.
3
But
of us
most
made it.
men are, most firefighters are men. I mean, most artists are women.
Right.
You know,
Right,
so
you're right.
it's
So
like-
it's a absolute. I think it's some of both. I mean, honestly, I'm shocked to say that I've heard these things said, but so in my lifetime, I don't know if anybody's been watching the PBS miniseries, The Makers. I was grading and I started watching this sort of brief history of feminism, and was reminded of things that honestly were a bit before I was alive, but that were still very much part of a time that, I don't think my students quite understand existed. But then I think about my own history, and I was definitely told as an undergrad, I was told that if I wanted to be an artist, I could not have children. I shouldn't. It wasn't a couldn't, it was like a shouldn't. If you really want to have an art career, you should not have children, which I was sort of shocked to be being told. It was told with a grain of salt by somebody who had kids and loved them, but who also kept her family very much hidden from her academic career, because she understood that if she discussed having a grandchild, there were repercussions, in terms of how she was viewed and how she was thought about on a college campus. And I also know somebody who, hid a child in upstate New York, right? So, a couple who are married and both artists who just made the decision, not high secrecy, but essentially made the decision to have the baby and then continue both of their careers in New York without sort of explicitly ever mentioning to anyone or showing up with the child in tow. And that was within the last 4 or 5 years. That's actually considered to be sort of a decision you might make, because the repercussions of being seen as she'll stop making work, right? And then the repercussions for her spouse are probably less, though I'm happy to say that may be equalizing at least, because I did just have a friend who's in a 2-artist household, but happens to be male, and his partner happens to be female, ask, because they are about to have a child, what I felt like the realities of that were, and I said a lot of very positive things about it. But he was actually more concerned and protective, I think, of his partner, who does have a commercial career, who has curators coming to her studio about, it was actually a conversation about, we're not really sure how much we should talk about this, and that's still, it is just a huge, I think, it slows your work, right, when you're doing childcare, whether you're male or female. So there's some just structural inequities, and then some of it is just flat out probably discrimination, who do you perceive an artist to be?
Can't you use a male name? Do you, obviously you have to meet, I guess, the directors and the curators and everything, but I know in writing, pen names, a lot of times females would use male names so that their work would be, acknowledged. That's pretty sad society that we have to
I think there's another issue here that doesn't really have to do with gender at all, and that's, I'm not picking on the Museum of Contemporary Art here, I'm picking on all of them. They're really regressive. They want the big shocking show that brings people in. Years ago it was Piss Christ by Serrano, and it was, whatever, just to bring the crowd in. Various other artworks, which were actually very good works, deserve to be in there, but they're not progressive. We've been at war for the last 2 decades, and I don't know of any major show that has dealt with the militarism in this country, by man or woman, hardly, and so, and I think it's this, Rachel Maddow wrote this drift on the way that we sort of drift, and I think that's what happens, is that institutions drift into comfort zones without really knowing it. So I think our role, FIG's role, this is to make them a little uncomfortable. Say, okay, guys, you know, what's going on here? You've got women curators, and you're still showing, and you're not dealing with issues that men or women artists deal with that are substantive or that are challenging U.S. foreign policy, or saying, why have we been at war all these years, and what about a show on drones, or, you know, any of this stuff? I mean,
Actually,
it's
there
just
is
not.
one at UCSD right now.
Okay, see,
But-
the
but
college
that- yeah,
and
it's an
university.
academic
drones, actually,
A-
last year.
Actually, the
That's
more
right.
municipal
They were great.
museums, I've been doing a little research. The municipal museums, the city museums, like the San Diego Museum of Art, those have a little more freedom. But there are certain other institutions do not, and they link together and they meet and they decide what's in, what's out, pedigree, and also look at the boards. The boards of a lot of museums are really the kind of liberal but conservative, the kind of neoconservatism. The kind that, you know, want their daughters to be able to get abortions, but they love the drone system or whatever. They're on the boards of these, a lot of other, I mean, not everyone, I mean, I don't want to generalize, but
But isn't it a lot to do with grants that are available, you know, that, through the museums, you know? Like,
I'm not sure. Do you mean, I mean, grants aren't going to specify a male versus female artist.
well, the money's
So-
there for certain subjects, you know.
So are women not creating the work to those subjects? Are women not creating the work that is creating the blockbusters?
No, I mean, I just think it is really hard. And I can say that I used to sit in a classroom and say, you know, why are all these problems existing? I used to work, you know, I worked at the Women's Caucus for Art, the Feminist Art Project, Woman Made Gallery, and now I work at an institution, and it is really not easy. And I feel that, you know, I'm doing my best to make strides. You know, we're showing right now the work of Marianela de Los, who's here tonight. You know, we've had more work out from the vaults by women. I can check in my database the last time, you know, we're installing work by Ann Mudge or Uta Barth, but this week that haven't been out. But, you know, I have tried to get a show called Women, War and Industry on the books for 2 years, and I cannot get it on the books. And there's other issues about that. It's not necessarily why my institution won't show that, but there's bigger issues. But it is really challenging, and it's challenging from all fronts, not just showing women artists, just having more diversity in the galleries. And it is really beyond my expectations, the challenges that I have encountered, you know, working for institutions. And you know, I think, you know, maybe if there was more funding, you know, there's a lot of pressure to have, you know, Picasso, Dali, you know, on your walls and on banners outside of your building to get people to come to your museum to help fund the institution. And, you know, of course, like, this is not a model I'm excited about, and I think we should maybe try to not do that model and see what happens. But to convince, it's baby steps. It's a complicated process, and you know, I'm not sure what the answers are. It's a constant process, and it's not easy to take, you know, these steps by leaps and bounds. It's just sort of, you know, the small steps. And I think I'm really excited to work for an encyclopedic museum where part of my job is going to the vaults and seeing what hasn't been exhibited in a long time. What do we have that nobody knows that we have? And how can you incorporate more voices? You know, I just coming off of a huge survey project, Behold America, which is certainly not without its issues, but, you know, one of the things that I was more interested in at times was having more diverse voices, whether that be San Diego artists, whether that be, you know, women artists or Latino artists, whereas the typical curatorial model is every piece in this show absolutely the best piece by this artist, and is it significant to the thesis, where I'm a little bit more willing to open the net, but even that little thing is not an easy one to convince everybody to get on board with. So And whether or
It's
not it's right.
different for the, San Diego Museum of Art has a huge collection. Of course, it's mostly of men, I mean, because it, you know, and it has a huge, wonderful collection. And I wish it rotated more. I mean, I would love to see more of what's in there. It's like a little secret that it has this amazing, really good quality collection.
I know the statistic is shocking. It's most museums are only showing 8 to 10% of their permanent collection at any given time.
The Met, it was 4%.
Yeah.
I was growing up.
Okay,
I remember
we've got some
someone
questions
telling
here.
me.
I had a question. There's two questions actually. The first one is, even though it is a women-dominated profession, do you think that doesn't mean necessarily that it's not sexist? And the second question is going off, do you think that the art industry is basing off of, like she was saying, the institution? So through the institution, you have patriarchal and then sexist and the socioeconomic status, which could also be affecting their diversity. So do you think if you were to go through, if you were to completely take down that system and just go from the bottom, do you think you would see the diversity change?
So take down the system, meaning change the executive leadership at museums, change the boards? Do we need to get more women on the boards?
Just in a completely blank
You
state.
know, we need another WPA that includes women. I mean, WPA funded the careers of male artists for the whole last century, practically. What is WPA? Works Progress Administration, the Roosevelt period.
They built half of SDSU's campus.
Yeah, most of
The swimming pool in my grandmother's town, which lasted 80 years, and painted the post
county
office murals.
administration, city administration institutions, swimming pools in all the neighborhoods.
But funded art as well.
And you had people like, a lot of artists, like, they went to the war, World War II, and they had to paint camouflage on trucks, and they used artists, and it was men. And they came back, and they got all these veterans benefits, and a lot of them helped them go on with their art career. So let's, you know, to me, it's like, it's a jobs program that those individuals got back then when women were, go back after the war. During the war, they had to build machinery. After the war, they go back and be homemakers, you know, so. And then when Lucy Lepard talked about it in the 70s, women were, their studios were their kitchen, or where they do their ironing, and they were making art that was smaller, and they weren't getting degrees necessarily. But that's all changed now. Women have MFAs, they've got studios, they're not working on their kitchens for the most part. They're pretty serious artists. So it's time, it's just time to just get out of that comfort zone. But I don't expect the San Diego Museum of Art to start showing 90% women or 40. They have a huge, beautiful collection of other work. They have a different mission.
But that said, there was a wave of alternate institutions. So I guess if your question has to do with like, well, does the art world have to be based in these institutions? Where there's already this structural...
It seems like it's imitating the institutions already, because if there is a lack of diversity when you're trying to present your work, then don't you think there's already a hindering? And so you have a mass amount of people, like the majority, which is considered the minority, and they're being discouraged from not going into this.
I mean, there's a couple solutions. Maybe one of them is just looking at what art world you're talking about too. That like the women's art building in the early 70s created, you know, a huge space to go see a lot of women's art. I benefited from a solo exhibition at a gallery in Austin called Women in Their Work, which has for 25 years maybe now given solo shows, which are the much harder thing, right? When you look at gallery statistics, to get a solo show in a gallery for a woman is like, those statistics go way below 10% often, or I'm guessing they're lower. I don't actually know the number. And all this to say that gallery has actually a quite nice program. They do wonderful exhibition brochures. They're sometimes perceived to be, I think, a bit dowdy in that their name is very linked to this moment of alternative women's galleries, but they continue to, produce shows by younger artists as well. And I guess I wonder if what I've always told younger artists that I teach, whether they're male or female or what have you, that like one of the best ways to get shown coming out of school is essentially to make your own gallery, right? And that shouldn't be the end of it, that if you would like to, don't tell yourself you can't be in the Whitney Biennial, but that making your own space is probably much more valuable in the end and changes I don't know if this answers your question, but I do think it points to, we've been a little bit gallery museum centric, except that I think Doris has routinely pointed out nicely that the actual makers of the art are much more dispersed and female, and all over the place.
There's also then the question of whether you want to identify as a woman's show, and whether that again ghettoizes. Okay, we have, do you have one more question from the audience?
Punishment for that.
Just a general impression from any of you wish to speak on it, and that is with the more contemporary art being based in electronics and technology, and the history sort of, there's always this kind of a dichotomy where, men are interested in electronics and all that kind of stuff, and women aren't. Is your impression that young women are making art that incorporates technology and electronics at the same speed that men are? Like it's the same.
Interesting question.
Yeah, I think it's generational. Like I'm definitely slower than people 20 years younger than me. But among people who are my peers, it's pretty equal. I don't see a gender.
And I'd say my students at San Diego State are equally split. Those who are dealing with computer-based art and who aren't. I don't think there's a gender difference.
I think there might be a slight difference with like sort of hardcore coding, perhaps. There are just, I don't know how that happens, but then in terms of other art making tools, that actually what I see now, and this is kind of interesting to me, is that because I've always really liked teaching all my students how to use power tools, largely because I teach at a small liberal arts college. Most of my students have, or many of them have never made anything, like they can't glue. So, with love, they just haven't had opportunities to make things the way that the school system has developed, the way that our culture has changed. They don't get to make things, so to teach all of them how to make things is really fun. They really enjoy it. They're actually hungry and sort of romantic about tools.
DIY.
And being able to make things. I've also really liked to teach women how to use power tools because they do tend to have still been culturally sort of discouraged from some of these things or not encouraged to the same rate. But interestingly, almost more dramatic than any gender division in the tools that they're willing to use is actually just the extent to which all of them have been totally de-skilled, male and female.
Yeah.
And that actually the women may now feel more confident making things because they weren't discouraged from doing something that was at some point considered perhaps still effeminate in junior, like that they keep drawing a little longer, painting a little longer, maybe not, but they may have other, it's interesting, it's a good question.
I worry about that same sort of issue in terms of street art. So same with technology. Street artists and graffiti artists tend to be male. And there's going to be a huge institutional push to get those artists into the galleries, and where are the women? And they are much less because of danger.
Yeah, safety issue.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap up, and I'm going to have to cut your time down a little bit because we're running a little long. So I'll give you each a minute or two for your closing thoughts. And Amy, since you're nodding, you get to go first.
Well, I want to touch on a couple of points that were raised in the questions, which I thought all the questions were really great. And back to, I was thinking about with your question just about economic issues. And, I think that is also a big issue in the arts. And a lot of times people who have family support, financial support, or, their parent was an artist or their parent was a professor, have certain access, status, and economic opportunities that others don't. And I think that's a major thing that needs to change with the arts, and I think it's slowly changing. But it's pretty incredible even, I find when I start a new job at an institution, sometimes I'll meet a new curator that's, 32 years old and this is their first job. and think, wow, how nice. But, you know, and, you know, I think that also ties into a lot of other issues about, you know, incorporating women and having our, you know, galleries and museum spaces more diverse. I also think, to your question about, you know, names and, you know, should you use a man's name, that this kind of thing, do artists do that? One thing we didn't really touch on that I know a lot of younger artists think about is this pressure to have like a look. You know, a lot of younger women artists say that there's this pressure to, like, you know, when you're trying to get a gallery, you have to have a look. And that is really, you know, an appealing thing. And a colleague of mine who co-wrote a great book called Girl Drive, Emma B. Berenstein, and she and her friend traveled the country in an attempt to sort of redefine feminism, and they asked a lot of, you know, artists and art historians and curators these questions about feminism, and that was something that was really important to her, and I thought I would mention it. I know I only have maybe 20 more seconds, but I just want to say, you know, no organization is perfect, but I did work at Woman Made Gallery for 3 years, and I have some statistics here that close to 7,000 women have exhibited their work at Woman Made, including Helen Redman, who I know was here earlier, since 1992. Chicago also has ARC Gallery, which was founded in 1973. Chicago is often considered the second city, but it was just 1 year after the infamous, if you will, AIR Gallery was founded. And you know, I think that I'm often asked, I was always asked when I worked at Woman Made, and since my association from there continues, are women's groups important? Are women's spaces important? And, you know, of course, yes. And I think that, you know, the statistics that you can read in Maura Riley's essay, an introduction to a book called Global Feminisms, is really helpful and supportive of why, you know, there's a lot of work to do, both from the historian side, the dealer side, and to make more opportunities for women artists, to show more women artists' work, and to try to level the playing field in some way.
Now, I have a follow-up question for you. By a look, do you mean the look of your work, consistency of your work, or like
interesting?
a look?
No, frighteningly, I suspect she meant
the physical
like,
appearance. Yes.
The cult of the author is a little different for women.
You're pointing at me.
Yes, George. I don't know if you have time for a quick comment, but I just felt earlier when we were talking about the technology, I wanted to mention, Amy, how much it meant to us here when I felt that you were connected with bringing Pay White into the museum, and that our students were able to have an opportunity to look at a dynamic public artist and to get a wonderful presentation. Denise, we went over to, when we were talking about the broadening the diversity within the presentation in the museum, we saw the Yinka Shonabadi, and that was such a very important thing for our program. But I'm also noticing when we go into the museum with our students that we're not seeing at those particular venues the large museum base. We're there. Right. And we're really excited. Yeah. And somehow I hope we can continue to build on that, because I think a lot of what is happening in education at our institution and things is part of the solution here. We're really thinking along, you're bringing things that are complementing what our students want and need. And I think eventually, I hope that we will be the base too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we do too, and I can't thank you enough for your support for the Pay White lecture, because that was really, you know, the room was by far from filled, but to have such a young audience there was really powerful. And you know, we do tend, our audience, our base is older, it's white. And when we need to do a better job of having a diverse or more diverse audience, or will cease to exist or be significant, and that is an ongoing challenge. And so I thank you for your support for those types of events, because, you know, trust me, someone at the museum is counting, and so I'm always happy when there are people there.
Okay. Thank you for bringing them, and please continue. We'll be coming.
Next, Allison White, and then Allison Wiese, and Doris.
Okay. Well, going back to historical point of view, we've come from a time in the Renaissance and Baroque period, and even later than that into the 18th and 19th century, where women were not even considered as creative beings. Men were the creative beings. Even though women, gestated children, they were just the incubators. So that men were creative, and that transferred over into the visual arts, that women could not be artists because they were not by nature creative. And I think we've kind of come a long way with that, but I think there's still something going on where women are not kind of pushing through to full equality, and so there's still, as you were saying, a lot of work to be done. And I liked Allison's point about the child care issues, and like stupid basic stuff is still not solved that allows people to have full time to create. I remember being at a conference with a fellow scholar, and I noticed she was obviously about 6 or 7 months pregnant. I said, "Oh, congratulations." She said, "Oh, please, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody." But these issues are real. Yeah, absolutely.
I had no prepared statement, but I would just say I'm sort of like, even at my own institution, was really interested to talk to other women about that, because I took a tenure track job, which was a wonderful thing to happen to me, and then was pregnant and had to, literally didn't know, even though I trust my department and have a wonderful, I know my colleagues well enough to know that I'm not in big trouble for doing this. It's not the institution. Some institutions I've heard tell, you're literally told sort of you either have a child or you get tenure. I know women faculty who were 2 years earlier than me given an entirely different and much less good deal than me. And ones who 10 years, earlier were given entirely different deals, and because nothing is on the books really, it was all ad hoc. That could change again for younger colleagues or friends of mine. But I think the extent to which we don't talk about these things sort of is what shocks me, that it's like it's sort of considered gauche for some reason to talk about these things. I don't know if it's a stigma of a backlash against feminism, because now these are really definitely issues that men face as much as we,
Right.
I mean, like in my household we're 50-50, so presumably like the lack of more than 24 hours paternity leave here would affect my household too. So it's not necessarily, but it disproportionately affects women.
Well, related to that, I remember I was a panelist at another discussion and brought up the issue of childcare and how important I thought it was, and Kinsey Moreland, I think, covered it, and then somebody responded, "Oh, well, if people get childcare, I'm not willing to have my tax," and I wasn't even telling about necessarily taxpayers, but employers or something. "Oh, I don't want my money to go to take care of other people who choose to have children. I have my dog, are they gonna take care of my dog?" So it's like this, it's either or, you can't be generous, and again, about this idea of gift giving. So I think I was so disappointed when I heard that, because then I thought, okay, no wonder we can't be like a European country where women and families are valued and are given that assistance. And it was really disheartening for me to hear that people were thinking that way. And I think that the hardships of being a mother, and being a professional and being an artist, I have great admiration for the artists that are in the show, for you that are in the panel. I'm a mom and I'm a teacher and I was an artist, but at some point I realized I couldn't give to everything, and I had to put my art making on the side because the other things were just too much, for me to handle. So I have great admiration for those of you guys, both the artists in FIG and in the panel that do all of those things. Really super.
Doris, we're going to wrap up with you.
Oh.
Okay, I'll be quick. I had a lot of ambivalence about this. And I talked to Susan about it, and I was like, what is this giving thing? Ida Mother was very giving, very bitter about it. Really upset, like you don't want to go near her because she's like a vortex, you get sucked in, that kind of giving. I mean, it was just, so, but I really enjoyed this show. Jokes aside, I like my little pile of stuff, and I was like, oh, yeah, I like taking, And so I thought it was fun, and I might have been softened a little by my mother, the vortex, the night before. She's always giving me things because she just wants to get rid of them. And Nina Karavaslis and I were talking about, we're going to have a show at Protea Gallery that's called Motherload. And it's everything we want to get rid of, and a big yard sale that our mothers have given us that we don't want. But anyway, last night, she just got a whole bunch, she moved here recently, and she got a whole bunch of books, and this is a book from 1883. It's a very old book. And she said, you might want this. And it was just really interesting. My mother is a feminist. I mean, she definitely is. She probably would never call herself that. But anyway, it's called The Hearthstone. Anybody ever heard of this?
No.
I got to read the subtitle to you. And when she gave it to me, it's beautiful etchings. I think they're etchings or prints, nice prints in it. Really detailed, or prints from etchings. But this is what it's called, The Hearthstone, or Life at Home, a Household Manual, containing hints and helps for homemaking, home furnishing, decorations, amusements, health, directions, the sick room, the nursery, the library, the laundry, etc. Together with a complete cookery book by Laura C. Halloway, author of Ladies of the White House, etc. This is what it says right here. Published at the Bradley Gerritsen and Company, Philadelphia, and it's just. And then my mother went back here, and she was like, she kept the space here. My mother's a real gourmet, everything. She made my wedding dress. She's like particular down, and she's got her loop, she's like one of these antiques, everything. She said, the chocolate recipe in here is wonderful. So I'm going to check that out later. But I just thought it was kind of, my mom calmed down, and she gave me something last night, and I just wanted to share it with you. And it kind of softened me a little bit before I came here. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, audience, and thank you, Fig, for the gifts. Those have been